There is a sound that wakes you from the deepest sleep and leaves no trace of itself, not loud enough to be identified, not sharp enough to be named, just the specific disturbance of air in a room that should be still. I heard that sound at 4:53 in the morning on a Thursday in October, and I lay in the dark with my eyes open and listened to my wife remove her shoes in the hallway and move through the apartment with the careful, measured steps of someone trying very hard not to be heard. She had been gone since 11:30 the night before. I knew this because I had reached for her in my sleep at midnight and found the bed empty and cool, and I had lain there for 4 hours and 53 minutes with the specific wakefulness of a person whose body understands something that his mind is still negotiating with itself about whether to acknowledge. She came into the bedroom and stood at the foot of the bed for a moment. I could feel her there, the slight change in the room's temperature, the held quality of her breathing, and then she moved to her side and lifted the duvet and settled in beside me with the particular care of someone performing a return rather than simply coming to bed. I kept my eyes closed. I kept my breathing even. I said nothing. And the night closed over us like water over a stone, smooth and silent and completely undisturbed on the surface, and underneath it everything had already changed. Hi everyone. My name is Patrick. I'm 41 years old, and I need to get this off my chest because I've been carrying it alone for longer than is good for anyone, and the carrying of it has taught me things I think are worth saying out loud. I work as a secondary school history teacher, a job that requires you to understand how the past shapes the present, how the thing that happened before the thing you're examining is always the most important context for understanding it. I have been applying this principle, involuntarily, to my own life for the last 8 months. I had been married to Laura for 10 years. We had 2 children, Maya, who was 9 and had the specific moral seriousness of a child who had decided that fairness was the organizing principle of existence and was prepared to defend this position indefinitely, and Joel, who was 7 and approached the world with a physical enthusiasm that expressed itself primarily through running into things, an approach that had so far cost us 2 broken vases and 1 hairline fracture in his left wrist that he described as his best story. Laura was 38, a freelance graphic designer who worked from home 3 days a week and from a shared studio space the other 2, warm and creative and possessed of the specific social gift of making whatever environment she was in feel slightly more alive than it had been before she arrived. I had loved her for 12 years. I had trusted her for all of them. The woman who slipped back into our bed at 4:53 on a Thursday morning in October was the same woman I had loved for 12 years. I spent the next 3 months finding out who else she had been. I did not say anything on Thursday morning. This requires some explanation, because the natural question is, why not? You knew she hadn't been there. You'd been awake for 5 hours. You felt her come back. Why did you lie in the dark and say nothing? The honest answer is that I wasn't ready. Not for the conversation, I wasn't afraid of the conversation. I wasn't ready for the answer. There is a specific period in every crisis where the question is already fully formed and the answer is being withheld, not by the other person, not by circumstances, but by your own unwillingness to make the truth irreversible. I was in that period. I needed 1 more day of the life I had before the answer made it a different life. So I lay in the dark and breathed evenly and waited for the alarm at 6:30. When it went off, Laura reached over and turned it off, her side, her alarm, the routine of 10 years, and I stretched and blinked and said good morning in the specific groggy register of a man waking up normally, and she said good morning back in the voice of a woman who had been awake for an hour and a half and was very carefully performing having slept. I noticed the performance. I noticed the specific quality of her voice, not tired in the way of someone who had slept badly, but alert in the way of someone who was managing the first minutes of the day with deliberate attention. I noticed and said nothing. We made breakfast. Joel ran into the kitchen doorframe. Maya explained at length why the school's policy on packed lunch contents was structurally unjust. I made coffee and listened to the children and watched Laura move through the morning routine with the specific ease of a woman who had been doing this for 10 years and knew every step of it, and I thought, she came home at 5 in the morning and she is standing at the toaster right now making toast for our children and she is doing it perfectly. The children went to school. Laura said she had studio time today, she'd be back by 4. I said fine. She kissed me, on the cheek, not the mouth, which I noted and then told myself not to note, and left. I sat at the kitchen table for 20 minutes with my coffee going cold and thought about what I was going to do. I was a history teacher. My professional instinct was to go back further, to find the point before the point, the context that explained the event. I was not going to be able to understand Thursday morning without understanding what had been building toward it, and I had been, I now admitted to myself, ignoring the building for longer than I wanted to acknowledge. Let me go back to August. August was when the texture of things had changed. Not dramatically, not in the way that announces itself and demands acknowledgement, but in the specific way that a painting changes when you look at it from a different angle, the same elements, differently arranged, producing a different impression. Laura had always had a rich social life. This was one of the things I had loved about her, the specific warmth of her friendships, the way she maintained connections across years and distance, the creative community she was embedded in that produced frequent dinners and exhibitions and the casual gatherings of people who made things and talked about making things. I had always been comfortable in this, secure enough not to feel threatened by a wife whose social life extended well beyond the boundaries of our partnership. In August this social life had acquired a new frequency. Not in the obvious sense, the same friends, the same kinds of events, but in the texture of her return from them. She came home from evenings out in August with a quality I had been misidentifying for 2 months. I had been calling it the creative energy of someone who had been in stimulating company. I understood now that I had been wrong about the source. Our friend Diane, Laura's closest friend since art school, a woman I had always liked for her directness, had come for dinner in September and had watched Laura through the meal with the specific attention of someone who knows something and is deciding whether this is the moment to act on the knowing. I had noticed it at the time and filed it as nothing. I unfiled it now. I also thought about the phone. Laura's phone had developed, in September, a new relationship with surfaces. It no longer rested on them. It traveled with her, upstairs, into the bathroom, out to the garden when she took calls. This was new. I had noted it and told myself, work. A new client. Confidential creative brief. I had found reasons because reasons were available and because the alternative was this, sitting at a kitchen table on a Thursday morning thinking about who my wife had been with for the 5 hours she wasn't in our bed. I got up. I went to my study. I opened my laptop. I was a history teacher. I was going to start at the beginning. Patrick's decision to say nothing on Thursday morning is the section's most psychologically revealing choice, not weakness but the specific self-protective behavior of a man who understands that acknowledging the truth will make it permanent, and who is allowing himself one final morning inside the life he believed he had. His professional identity as a history teacher is the story's central metaphor, the man trained to go back further, to find the context before the event, applying his professional methodology to his personal crisis. Laura's performance of a normal morning, the specific alertness of someone managing the first minutes rather than emerging from sleep, is observed with the precision of someone who has been watching human behavior in classrooms for years and knows the difference between genuine and performed states. The accumulated signals from August and September, the texture of her returns from social events, Diane's watchful dinner attention, the phone's new relationship with surfaces, are recontextualized in this section. They were present all along, individually filed as innocent, now retrieved and reassembled in the light of 4:53. The kitchen table and the cold coffee are the section's closing image, the man who is about to apply historical methodology to the most important investigation of his life, sitting with what he already knows before he knows what to do with it. I started with what I had access to and what I had the right to examine. Our shared computer was the first thing. Laura used it occasionally for work when her laptop was charging. She preferred her own machine but the shared one served as a backup. I opened the browser history, which neither of us had ever thought to clear because neither of us had ever had a reason to care about it. 3 weeks of ordinary domestic browsing, recipe searches, school term dates, an online furniture shop, design industry news. Nothing that told me anything. Then I opened the shared family calendar. Laura maintained it, she was the organizer of our household's time and the calendar was her instrument. I went back to August and looked at the entries with the specific attention of someone searching for pattern rather than individual events. What I found was not evidence, exactly, nothing that would have meant anything to someone who didn't already have the context of Thursday morning. But there was a name. Not every week, not even every fortnight, but recurring with the kind of regularity that a calendar entry acquires when it has become a fixture. The name was in the notes field of several entries marked studio, a note that simply said N, review session, sometimes with a time, sometimes without. N. I thought about N for the rest of Thursday morning. I didn't know anyone in Laura's professional circle whose name began with N. Not a close contact, not a collaborator she'd mentioned. I searched my memory carefully and arrived at nothing. I found him by Friday afternoon. Laura's professional life was documented online. She had a website, a design portfolio, profiles on the networks her industry used. I went through her listed collaborators and clients and contacts methodically, the way I would prepare a source analysis for a class, checking each name against the N I was looking for. I found 3 NS in her professional network. 2 were women. The third was a man named Nick Callahan, photographer, 44 years old, based at a studio complex in the east of the city. His website showed a man who was good at his work, the specific visual intelligence of someone who had been looking at things carefully for a long time. He and Laura had a professional connection that was visible and documented. She had designed the layout for a publication he contributed to 2 years ago. They had, apparently, worked together. I looked at his photograph for a long time. I said nothing to Laura on Friday. She came home from the studio at 4:15, normal and warm, and we made dinner together and helped with homework and did the bedtime routines and watched television in the evening with the specific domestic ease of 2 people who had been doing this for 10 years, and I performed all of it with a completeness that I found, afterward, both impressive and disturbing. Saturday morning. Laura said she was meeting Diane for coffee, a regular arrangement, entirely plausible. She left at 10. She was back at 12:30, which was consistent with coffee rather than anything longer. I called Diane that afternoon, from my car, parked outside the supermarket. Diane and I had always had a direct relationship, the specific comfort of 2 people who both loved the same person and could speak honestly to each other about that love without it becoming complicated. I said, Diane, I need to ask you something directly and I need you to answer me honestly. A pause. Okay, she said. Careful, but not surprised. Is there something I should know about Laura? A longer pause. The specific pause of a person who has been carrying something and has just been asked whether they're carrying it. Patrick, she said. I've been going back and forth about calling you for 3 weeks. Tell me, I said. She told me what she knew, not everything, she was clear about that, she knew the outline rather than the detail. Laura had told her in September. Diane had pushed, apparently, having noticed the same quality in Laura's demeanor that I had been misidentifying as creative energy. Nick Callahan. Since July. She didn't know how serious it was. She'd told Laura she needed to tell me. Laura had said she was going to. She was going to tell me, I said. That's what she said, Diane said. I don't know if she meant it. I think she meant it. But it's October and she hasn't, and I've been sitting with that for a month and she stopped. I'm sorry, Patrick. I'm sorry I didn't call sooner. I didn't know what the right thing was. You're doing the right thing now, I said. I drove home. I made lunch for the children. I helped Joel build something structural out of cardboard that he immediately ran into, collapsing it, which he described as a planned demolition. I helped Maya understand the concept of the Roman Senate for her school project, explaining how a republic could become something else so gradually that the people inside it didn't notice until the transformation was complete. She said, "Is that what happened to Rome?" "Among other places," I said. I went to bed that night knowing what I was going to do next and waiting until I was ready to do it. The investigation's chain of causation is clean and methodical, appropriate for a man whose professional habit is the systematic examination of historical evidence. The calendar entry with its repeated N is the first link, a small anomaly that would have been invisible to someone not already looking but is immediately legible to someone who is. The identification of Nick Callahan through professional network analysis is the chain's second link, not a discovery but a confirmation of a hypothesis already forming. Diane's disclosure is the chain's most significant link. It transforms the investigation from inference to testimony, from pattern reading to named fact. The timing of her disclosure, she has been carrying this for 3 weeks and has been going back and forth about calling, is the section's most psychologically complex element. She chose loyalty to her friend for 3 weeks, then chose honesty to the husband when directly asked. The Roman Senate discussion with Maya is the section's quiet structural echo, the gradual transformation that the people inside it don't notice until it's complete. Patrick has been inside a transformation for 3 months and is only now, applying his professional methodology, beginning to map its full dimensions. The 2 weeks between Diane's phone call and the confrontation were the strangest weeks of my life. I made a decision that I want to explain carefully, because it requires explanation. I decided to keep living normally while I finished understanding what I was dealing with. Not because I was afraid to confront Laura, I was not afraid of that conversation. But because I had been a teacher long enough to understand that a poorly prepared presentation, however urgent its subject matter, lands worse than one that has been thought through. I was going to have one chance at this conversation. I was going to be ready for it. So I lived normally. I made breakfasts and marked essays and attended parents' evenings and had dinner with Laura every night and helped with bedtimes and watched television and said good morning and good night, and none of it was as it had been and all of it looked exactly the same. Laura, I noticed during those 2 weeks, was carrying something with increasing difficulty. The quality of her warmth had changed. She was warmer than usual, in fact, a specific excess of attentiveness that I recognized, from my professional experience of students who had done something they were ashamed of, as the performance of someone trying to make amends for something that hadn't yet been acknowledged. She initiated more than usual. She was more present at dinners, more engaged with the children, more physically affectionate with me, all of it the behavior of a woman who was either trying to compensate or trying to find her way back to something she'd been moving away from. I watched all of this and felt, with a clarity that surprised me, not anger but a kind of terrible sadness. Not for myself, or not only for myself. For the specific waste of it. For the months of parallel lives being run alongside each other, each requiring its own maintenance, neither fully inhabitable. I did one more thing before the confrontation. On a Thursday, 2 weeks after the first Thursday, I drove to the studio complex in the east of the city where Nick Callahan worked. Not to confront him, not to watch or follow or document. I simply needed to see the building. I needed it to be a real place rather than a website profile and a name in a calendar. It was a converted warehouse, the kind of building that the creative industry repurposed in the 90s and has occupied ever since. High windows, an intercom panel with a dozen studio numbers, bicycles chained outside, the specific aesthetic of a place that takes its own work seriously. I sat across the street in my car and looked at it for 20 minutes. People went in and out. None of them was Laura. None of them was Nick Callahan, as far as I could tell. I drove home. But the building was real now. It existed in the same world as our kitchen and Joel's cardboard constructions and Maya's Roman Senate and Laura making toast at 6:45 in the morning. It was not abstract. It was 40 minutes from our house and it had a door and a window and a buzzer with a number on it, and my wife had been there, and the knowledge of this was now fully three-dimensional in a way it hadn't been before I'd sat across the street and looked at it. Our neighbor and my friend, a man named Simon who taught physics at a different school and who had been a reliable presence in my life for 6 years, came over for dinner on the second Saturday. Laura was at an evening event, a design award ceremony, legitimate. She'd shown me the invitation, and Simon and I sat in the kitchen with wine and the specific comfort of two people who don't need to perform for each other. I told him. Not everything, the shape of it, the outline. Nick Callahan's name. The Thursday morning. Diane's phone call. He listened with the stillness of a man absorbing something he hadn't expected. "What are you going to do?" he said. "I'm going to talk to her this weekend," I said. I've been waiting until I was ready. Are you ready? I thought about it honestly. I think I'm as ready as I'm going to be. He nodded. He didn't tell me what to do, which was the correct response and one I was grateful for. The kids, he said. That's the only part I'm not ready for, I said honestly. Everything else I've processed. The conversation with Maya and Joel, that one I haven't been able to fully think through yet. Simon stayed until midnight. We talked about other things for most of it, his school, my school, a documentary we'd both watched, and the talking about other things was its own form of support. The reminder that a world existed outside the crisis, that it was still possible to be in it. I went to bed that night knowing that the following day was the day. Laura came home from the awards ceremony at 11, slightly flushed with wine and the social energy of an industry evening, warm and present in the specific way of someone who had been in good company. She kissed me hello and told me about the evening, and I listened and nodded and said the right things, and the last thought I had before I fell asleep was, tomorrow. The 2 weeks of managed normality between Diane's call and the confrontation raised the story's most significant alternative scenario: what would have happened if Patrick had confronted Laura immediately, on the Saturday afternoon of Diane's call? The confrontation would have occurred before Patrick had finished understanding what he was dealing with, before the studio building had become real, before Simon had been told, before Patrick had moved from the phase of discovery into the phase of preparation. The immediate confrontation might have been more emotionally raw, less structured, more susceptible to Laura's management of the conversation. It might have resulted in partial disclosure rather than full disclosure, in a conversation that Laura could shape because Patrick hadn't yet established the full perimeter of what he knew. Conversely, the 2 weeks of managed normality cost Patrick something: the specific toll of performing ordinary life while carrying extraordinary knowledge, the moral complexity of accepting Laura's excess warmth while knowing what he knew. There is no clean version of this scenario. But Patrick's choice, to wait until he was ready, to prepare the confrontation with the same methodical care he brought to the investigation, is consistent with his character and consistent with the professional identity that shapes his thinking throughout the story. Sunday morning. Laura made pancakes, a weekend tradition, the children's specific request, a ritual of 10 years that had survived everything and which I was aware, sitting at the kitchen table watching her at the stove, might not survive what I was about to do. Maya ate 3 pancakes and delivered a judgment on their quality. Joel ate 2 and ran into the table. I drank coffee and watched my wife make breakfast for our children and thought, this is the last Sunday morning that looks exactly like this. Simon took the children for the afternoon. I had asked him on Friday, in the specific shorthand of a long friendship, I need Sunday afternoon clear. He had said nothing except, what time should I come, and had arrived at 1 o'clock with the ease of a man who understood he was performing a necessary function and did not require explanation for it. Laura watched them go with the fond attention she always brought to the children leaving the house, and then turned to find me sitting at the kitchen table with the specific quality of stillness that is different from ordinary stillness. She looked at me. She came and sat down. I didn't put anything on the table between us, no evidence, no photographs, no documentation. I had decided this. I was not going to present a case file. I was going to have a conversation. I know about Nick, I said. She held very still. The specific stillness of a person who has been waiting for a sentence and has just heard it. How long have you known? She said. Long enough, I said. I want you to tell me about it. She looked at the table. Not in the calculating way of someone selecting a response, in the way of someone who has been carrying something very heavy and has suddenly been given permission to put it down. Since July, she said. 5 months. Yes. The Thursday 2 weeks ago, I said. You came home at 5 in the morning. I was awake. She looked up. Something in her face changed. You were awake. Since midnight, I said. I lay there for nearly 5 hours. You came in and lay down and I kept my eyes closed and said nothing, and I've been carrying that for 2 weeks. She put her hand over her mouth. Not a performance, the involuntary gesture of someone absorbing the full weight of what they're being told. "Patrick," she said. "I need you to tell me all of it," I said. "Not the version that manages the situation. All of it." She told me. It had started as a professional reconnection. They had worked together 2 years ago and he had contacted her in June about a new project, a book he was producing that needed a designer. They had begun meeting at his studio. The professional relationship had become something else gradually, in the way she described with the honest account of someone who had been telling themselves each step was small until the distance traveled was not small at all. "The Thursday," I said. "I know," she said. "I know how that looks. I know what it means that I came back at 5 and tried to." She stopped. "I was going to tell you. I have been trying to find a way to tell you for months." "Diane told me," I said. "In September you told Diane you were going to tell me." She closed her eyes briefly. "I know. It's October," I said. "It's the second week of October." "I know." I looked at her. At the woman I had loved for 12 years, who had been making pancakes for our children an hour ago with the specific warmth of a person who inhabits their life completely and who had been simultaneously living another portion of her life 40 minutes away in a converted warehouse for 5 months. "I need to understand something," I said. "Not about Nick. About the Thursday. You came home at 5 in the morning. You had been gone since 11:30. You came in quietly, removed your shoes in the hallway, came to bed with the specific care of someone trying not to be found out. I want to understand what that was like for you, not what you were doing, but what you were thinking. Coming home to this house, to our bedroom, after being somewhere else all night." She was quiet for a long time. When she spoke her voice had the quality of genuine honesty, the kind that arrives when everything else has been stripped away. "I was terrified," she said. "And I was also, I keep coming back to this word and I hate it, but I was relieved. Being back. Coming through the door. The specific relief of this house, our house, after." She stopped. "I knew it was wrong. I knew what I was doing to you every time. The coming home was its own form of knowing. And yet you kept going," I said. "And yet I kept going," she said. "I don't have a better answer than that." I sat with this. The kitchen was very quiet. The pancake pan was still on the stove. Outside, a Sunday street in October, the specific gray of a day that had decided not to commit to anything. "Do you want to stay married to me?" I said. She looked at me with an immediacy that told me she had been asking herself this question, in her own way, for months. "Yes," she said. "I know I have no right to say that. I know it might not matter. But yes." "Why?" I said. Not bitterly, I genuinely wanted the answer. She thought about it for longer than I expected. "Because this house is where I want to be," she said. "Because Maya and Joel are what I'm most proud of. Because you have been, the best version of the life I could have imagined for myself, and I have been an idiot about what to do with that." She paused. "Because it's 5 months and I've spent every single one of them knowing I was making a mistake and continuing to make it anyway, and the only explanation I have for that is the specific human capacity for choosing the wrong thing while knowing it's wrong." I sat with this for a long time. "I'm going to need time," I said. "I'm not telling you what I've decided because I haven't decided yet. What I know is that Maya and Joel come first in whatever happens, and that I'm going to need some time before I can make any other decision clearly." She nodded. "And I need you to end it," I said. "Today. Not tomorrow." "It's already ended," she said. "I ended it last week. The Thursday, that was the last time. I ended it by text the following day." I looked at her. "You ended it last week?" "Yes." Before I said anything. "Yes," she said. "I was going to tell you. This week. I had decided. I thought about this. About the specific complexity of a timeline in which she had ended the affair before the confrontation, not because she was caught but because she had arrived, on her own, at the decision that it needed to end. I held this alongside everything else I was holding and decided I could not evaluate it yet. It would need time, like everything else. Okay, I said. I need you to know that I'm not okay and that I'm going to need help being okay, and that I can't promise you what the help leads to. I know, she said. But I'm not leaving today, I said. I'm not making that decision today. She nodded. Something in her shoulders changed, not relief exactly, not the relief of having been forgiven, but the relief of a sentence that left a door open rather than closing it. We sat in the kitchen together in the gray October quiet, and after a while I got up and washed the pancake pan, and we waited for Simon to bring the children home. The confrontation is shaped throughout by Patrick's decision not to present a case file, a deliberate choice that reveals the difference between his goals and the goals of someone seeking justice. He is not trying to win a confrontation, he is trying to have a conversation from which something genuine can emerge. The decision to ask, "What was it like coming home?" rather than cataloging the evidence is the scene's most psychologically sophisticated moment. It invites Laura into genuine reflection rather than defensive response, and what she offers, the terror and the relief of returning, the specific quality of coming home as its own form of knowing that she was doing wrong, is more revealing than any confrontation could have extracted. Laura's disclosure that she had already ended the affair the previous week, before the confrontation, not because she was caught but because she had decided, is the section's most ambiguous detail. It is simultaneously evidence of genuine intention and evidence that Patrick has been waiting 2 weeks to have a conversation that the situation had already partially resolved without him. His response, holding this alongside everything else, unable to evaluate it yet, is the honest response, the mind that is still processing, that knows better than to rush to a conclusion about what this means. November arrived and we began the difficult work of trying to understand what we were going to do. I want to be precise about what this period looked like from the inside, because I think the period between discovery and decision is the part that gets least described, the long, unresolved middle of a crisis where neither the marriage nor the separation has yet been chosen, where both people are living inside an uncertainty that has no timeline and no guaranteed outcome. We started seeing a therapist. Not couples therapy, individual therapy, both of us, with different practitioners, which the couples therapist we eventually added recommended as the right order of things, addressed the individual before attempting the shared. My therapist was a man named Graham, in his 60s, who had the specific quality of a person who has heard many varieties of human difficulty and is not surprised by any of them. I liked him immediately and found, to my surprise, that the sessions were not primarily about Laura, they were about me, about the specific shape of my own contribution to the conditions in which the crisis had occurred, about what I had been bringing to the marriage and what I had not. This was harder than I expected. I had arrived at therapy with the implicit belief that I was there to process what had been done to me, and I found instead that Graham was interested in what I had been doing, or not doing, for 10 years. I had been present, he said. Physically present, practically reliable, entirely available. What he pressed me on, carefully over several weeks, was the quality of my presence, whether I had been fully there, emotionally, in the way that Laura's specific nature required. I was, Graham suggested gently, a person who processed things intellectually and expressed them analytically, and there was a question about whether the warmth that Laura needed to feel, not just know about, but feel, had been consistently available. I thought about this for a long time. I am not telling you this to distribute the blame for what Laura did, what she chose is her responsibility and I'm not absenting her from it. I'm telling you because I think the honest account of a marriage in crisis requires both people to be examined, and because Graham's question was a genuine one that I could not dismiss. Laura's individual work, from what she shared with me, was focused on a different question: why she had been unable to bring the dissatisfaction she'd been carrying to me directly, why the affair had felt, at its beginning, more possible than the conversation. This was a question I had my own strong feelings about, and learning to hold those feelings while she worked through her own process was one of the harder things I did during those months. The children knew something was wrong. Maya knew in the specific way of a 9-year-old who has decided that fairness is the organizing principle of existence and had detected an unfairness in the household atmosphere that she couldn't locate precisely but couldn't ignore. She asked me in November, with the directness she always brought to questions that mattered, "Are you and Mum okay?" I said, "We're going through something difficult. We're working on it." She considered this. "Are you going to stay together?" "I don't know yet," I said. "I'm sorry, that's not a better answer." She thought about it. "At least it's honest," she said. Joel asked no questions. Joel ran into things and built constructions and demolished them on purpose and brought me rocks he'd found in the garden and was, in his 7-year-old way, entirely himself throughout, which was, unexpectedly, one of the more stabilizing things in my daily life. The permanence of his enthusiastic physicality, its complete indifference to the adult weather around it. Simon came over every other week. We cooked, we talked, we sometimes didn't talk. His presence was the most reliable thing outside the house during those months, the friend who knew the full shape of it and didn't require me to manage what he knew. December arrived and I made a decision that I want to describe carefully, because it wasn't the decision people expected and it requires more explanation than a single sentence. I decided to stay. Not because I had forgiven everything, I hadn't, and I was not pretending to. Not because the marriage was repaired, it wasn't, not close, and the repair was going to take longer than December. Not because I was certain it was the right decision, I was not certain of that either. I decided to stay because, when I examined the honest answer to the question of what I wanted, what I found underneath all the grief and anger and the specific wound of 5 months and a Thursday morning at 5 o'clock, underneath all of it, what I found was, I wanted the marriage to survive. Not the marriage as it had been, which had contained within it the conditions for what happened. A different marriage, rebuilt from a foundation that we had now, at significant cost, been forced to examine. I told Laura on a Sunday evening, the children asleep, the December kitchen quiet and cold with the specific quality of winter nights. "I want to try," I said. "Not to restore what we had, I don't think we should restore what we had. I want to try to build something that neither of us has to conduct a parallel life to survive." She looked at me with the expression of someone who has been waiting for a sentence without knowing which sentence it was going to be. "Yes," she said. "Whatever that takes." "It's going to take a long time," I said. "I know," she said. "And I'm going to have bad days," I said. "Days where I'm back in October and I can't get out of it. You need to be able to hold those days without deciding it means we've failed." "I understand," she said. "And you need to tell me things," I said. "The things you were carrying that you didn't tell me. That has to be different." "It will be," she said. "I'm working on understanding why it wasn't." We sat in the December kitchen and the conversation didn't resolve anything that wasn't already decided, but it named what the next phase was going to be, and the naming of it was its own form of beginning. Not because I had forgiven everything, I hadn't, and I was not pretending to. Not because the marriage was repaired, it wasn't, not close, and the repair was going to take longer than December. Not because I was certain it was the right decision, I was not certain of that either. I decided to stay because, when I examined the honest answer to the question of what I wanted, what I found underneath all the grief and anger and the specific wound of 5 months and a Thursday morning at 5 o'clock, underneath all of it, what I found was, I wanted the marriage to survive. Not the marriage as it had been, which had contained within it the conditions for what happened. A different marriage, rebuilt from a foundation that we had now, at significant cost, been forced to examine. I told Laura on a Sunday evening, the children asleep, the December kitchen quiet and cold with the specific quality of winter nights. "I want to try," I said. "Not to restore what we had, I don't think we should restore what we had. I want to try to build something that neither of us has to conduct a parallel life to survive." She looked at me with the expression of someone who has been waiting for a sentence without knowing which sentence it was going to be. "Yes," she said. "Whatever that takes." "It's going to take a long time," I said. "I know," she said. "And I'm going to have bad days," I said. "Days where I'm back in October and I can't get out of it. You need to be able to hold those days without deciding it means we've failed." "I understand," she said. "And you need to tell me things," I said. The things you were carrying that you didn't tell me. That has to be different. It will be, she said. I'm working on understanding why it wasn't. We sat in the December kitchen and the conversation didn't resolve anything that wasn't already decided, but it named what the next phase was going to be, and the naming of it was its own form of beginning. The Patrick of the December kitchen is a measurably different man from the Patrick of the October morning, not a repaired version of the same person but a more examined one, someone who has passed through Graham's careful questioning and arrived at a less comfortable but more honest understanding of his own contribution to the conditions of the crisis. The contrast between the two versions is the section's central insight: the man who lay awake for 5 hours saying nothing, who went back further to find the context before the event, has applied his historical methodology to himself and found something he would rather not have found, the specific quality of his presence in the marriage, the intellectual rather than felt warmth, the reliable availability that stopped short of the full emotional exposure Laura needed. This is not the same as what Laura did, and the story is careful not to equate them. But it is the honest account of a man who has used the crisis to examine himself rather than only the person who caused it. Maya's response to his honest answer, at least it's honest, is the section's most quietly devastating line: the 9-year-old whose organizing principle is fairness, finding fairness in her father's uncertainty, recognizing honesty as a value even when its content is painful. It is now 8 months since the December Sunday when I told Laura I wanted to try. I want to tell you where things are, with the honest uncertainty that is the only appropriate register for a marriage in active repair rather than completed resolution. We are still together. We are in couples therapy with a woman named Dr. Osei, who has the specific gift of holding two people's separate truths simultaneously without requiring either to cancel the other. The sessions are difficult and productive in equal measure, which is, she has told us, what they should be. We have bad weeks and better weeks and occasionally a week that feels like the marriage we are trying to build rather than the archaeology of the one that failed. The individual therapy continues alongside it. Graham remains my most reliable external reference point for the question of who I am inside this marriage and what I am bringing to it, a question I had not asked with sufficient honesty before October and which I am now asking with what feels like appropriate rigor. Laura is a different person in the marriage than she was before October. Not transformed, not the dramatic renovation that crisis sometimes promises and rarely delivers, but changed in the specific and durable way of someone who has looked at the worst version of their own choices and decided they would rather be a different version. She tells me things. This sounds small. It is not small. The woman who managed things privately, who carried dissatisfaction without bringing it to me, who chose an affair over a conversation, that woman is in active daily negotiation with a different version of herself, and the negotiation is visible and honest and sometimes difficult to witness, and I am glad it is happening. I told my class in February, we were studying a period of significant change, the decades after a major social rupture, that the most important question to ask about any period of transformation is not what was destroyed but what was built in its place. One of my students, a 15-year-old named Chloe who was uncommonly perceptive, said, "But what if what was built on the same foundations as what fell down?" I thought about this for a week. The answer I arrived at: the foundations have to be examined. Not replaced. The foundations of a 10-year marriage, of 2 children and a shared life, are not replaceable and would not benefit from replacement. But examined, honestly, with the full weight of what happened as the context for the examination. The foundations that allowed the crisis to develop, the quality of Patrick's presence, the quality of Laura's communication, the specific gap between what each of us thought we were providing and what the other needed to receive, these are the foundations under examination. Maya asked me in March whether I was happy. She asked it with the careful directness of a child who has been watching for months and is finally ready to ask the question she has been building toward. I thought about it honestly, in the way her question deserved. Not completely, I said. But more than I was in November. And more than I was in November than I was in October. So, it's getting better, she said. It's getting better, I said. She nodded with the satisfaction of a child who has received a quantifiable answer. Good, she said. Joel broke another thing, by the way. Joel, informed of this discussion, presented me with a rock he had found at school as what he described as a sorry from the vase. I accepted it and put it on the shelf with the others. Simon came for dinner in April and I realized, sitting across the table from him and Laura and watching the two of them talk about a film they'd both seen, that the evening felt ordinary in a way that evenings had not felt for a long time. Not the performed ordinariness of the weeks before the confrontation, genuine ordinariness, the kind that arrives when the crisis has been acknowledged and processed to a sufficient degree that the people inside it can be in the same room without the crisis taking up all the available space. I told him afterward, at the door, that it had been a good evening. He said, "Yeah, it was." And then, in the direct way that was simply his register, "You two are going to be okay." "I think so," I said. "I think we're going to have to keep working at it for a long time." "That's what okay looks like," he said. "It's not a destination. It's the working." What I've learned, and I offer this as the honest residue of 8 months of examination rather than as wisdom I arrived at cleanly. I've learned that the 5 hours I lay awake on that Thursday morning were the most important 5 hours of my marriage, not because of what I discovered in them, but because of what I did with them. I chose to wait. I chose to go back further. I chose to understand before I confronted. This was the right choice for me, and it produced a confrontation that was a conversation rather than a detonation, and the conversation produced something that a detonation might not have. I've learned that being present is not the same as being available. I was present in my marriage in every measurable way, physically, practically, reliably, and I was not always available in the way that Laura needed, in the felt rather than known way, the warmth that she could experience as warmth rather than as the reliable warmth of a good and steady man. This is not the same as what she did. But it is part of the honest account. And I've learned, and this is the part one hold most carefully, that marriage, like history, has to be examined from the inside as well as observed from the outside. The crisis was not an event that arrived from nowhere. It had a context. The context had a context before it. Going back far enough to find where the foundation needed attention is not the same as excusing what was built on top of it. It is simply the honest work of understanding what happened, so that what comes next is built differently. We are building differently. We are still building. The rocks are on the shelf, Joel's geological donations, each one presented with the specific ceremony of a 7-year-old who has decided that rocks are the correct currency of apology and affection. The Roman Senate is still on Maya's wall, a reminder of how things become something different so gradually that the people inside them don't notice. Laura makes pancakes on Sunday mornings. I make the coffee. It is not the same as it was. It is, in some ways that matter, better. That's all I know how to tell you. That's where we are. Patrick's resolution resists the narrative tidiness of either the divorce story or the redemption story, and this resistance is the section's most important quality. He has not arrived at a destination, he is in a process, visible and ongoing, whose outcome is not guaranteed and whose progress is measured in weeks rather than chapters. The marriage that is being built is explicitly not the marriage that existed before October, it is something new, constructed on foundations that have been examined rather than assumed, by two people who have been forced by crisis into the kind of honesty that comfortable marriages rarely require. Patrick's answer to his student Chloe, "The foundations have to be examined, not replaced," is the story's central thesis stated in his professional register, the historian's understanding that what came before is always the most important context for what comes next, applied to the most important structure in his life. Joel's rocks on the shelf, geological donations offered as currency of apology and affection, and Maya's Roman Senate on the wall, the transformation that happens so gradually the people inside it don't notice, are the story's two closing images, placed in the same domestic space, available to be read as metaphor or as simply the ordinary evidence of a family that is, imperfectly and honestly, still there. Patrick's story is about the specific cost and the specific value of going back further, the historian's instinct applied to personal crisis, the determination to find the context before the event rather than treating the event as its own sufficient explanation. The 5 hours lying awake on Thursday morning are the story's founding image, not the discovery of the affair, but the choice of how to respond to the discovery, the decision to hold the knowledge and examine it before acting on it. This patience, which could be called avoidance but which the story presents as a form of intelligence, produces a confrontation that is genuinely a conversation that produces something genuine in return. Laura's arc is rendered with the complexity it requires. The relief of coming home, which she names honestly in the confrontation scene, is the story's most psychologically precise detail about her, the woman who has been conducting a parallel life for 5 months and who experiences the specific pull of the life she is betraying as its own form of knowledge that she is doing wrong. That she has been feeling this and continuing anyway is not exoneration but it is human, the specific human capacity for knowing better and choosing differently anyway, which is one of the most common and least examined dimensions of infidelity. Graham's challenge to Patrick, the quality of his presence, the intellectual rather than felt warmth, the reliable availability that stopped short of full emotional exposure, is the story's most uncomfortable element and its most important. Patrick is not responsible for Laura's choices. But the marriage that contained those choices had a specific shape, and the shape had 2 contributors, and the honest examination of the crisis requires both to be named. This is not blame distribution, it is the difference between a historical account that explains causation and one that simply assigns guilt. Maya and Joel are the story's emotional constants, the 9-year-old whose organizing principle is fairness, who asks the right questions and accepts honest uncertainty as its own form of respect, the 7-year-old whose physical enthusiasm constitutes, perhaps, the story's most reliable emotional weather vane, stable and consistent regardless of the adult atmosphere around it. They are what both parents hold as fixed when everything else is uncertain, and they are, finally, the most compelling argument for the work that Patrick and Laura are doing, not the work of restoring what was, but the work of building what could be, on foundations that have been honestly examined, by 2 people who have looked at their worst moments and decided to keep going.